when you kill innocent children, innocent babies, little babies, with a chemical gas that is so lethal. People were shocked to hear what gas it was. That crosses many, many lines, beyond the red line, many, many lines. Even beautiful babies were cruelly murdered in this very barbaric attack. No child of God should ever suffer such horror.
Just keep it here.
Welcome back to AM Joy. By his own account, Donald Trump was so moved by the images of Syrian children gassed by Bashar al-Assad's forces that he reversed his non-interventionist stance and bombed a Syrian airfield in response. But if the images of suffering babies were enough to move Trump to act, as one aide told Axios, as a father and a grandfather, then what to make of his continued commitment to slamming the door on desperate refugees, men, women, children, and yes, babies, who are fleeing the atrocities in Syria and around the world? I want to go back to a moment last February when candidate Trump was asked about Syrian refugee children attending school in the United States.
I'm wondering if you would be able to look at these children in the face and tell them that they are not allowed to go to school in a community.
How long have they been here?
Some of them are here and some of them have been here.
How long have they been here?
Some of them aren't here yet.
Oh, I can look at their face and say you can't come here. Look, look. We have a country. I'll look at them. We don't know where their parents come from.
At that point, the Syrian civil war had been raging for 5 years. President Bashar al-Assad had already been accused of using chemical weapons against his own people, including children. And less than 6 months before that comment, Trump couldn't have avoided seeing this photo of 3-year-old Alan Kurdi, a Syrian boy who drowned along with his older brother and his mother as they tried to escape their own country. And joining me now, MSNBC anchor Ayman Mohyeldin, NBC News contributor Anand Giridharadas, former State Department spokesperson Nayyera Haq, and The Atlantic's David Frum. Thank you all for being here. And Anand, I'm going to come to you first, both because I mangled your name. I still have I'm still getting it. But you also, we were talking in the break, have a story that Donald Trump could not have avoided seeing before he was suddenly moved as a father and a grandfather by the Syrian atrocity.
These things become so abstract. So this Saturday morning, let's make it not abstract at all. So let's start with the story of these twins, Aya and Ahmed al-Youssef. They were born in the middle of last summer.
Hold back up.
I got it for you.
And in the month they were born, Donald Trump converted his Muslim ban proposal to a territorial ban. That was the beginning. And he, with that proposal, banned Aya and Ahmed from the United States. Court struck it down. When Aya and Ahmed were 6 months old, he formalized this ban with the executive order. They were now banned formally from entering the United States. When they were 8 months old, learning to pull themselves up on sofas and things like that, he reinstated and tweaked the ban, but they were still banned. Iraqis got an exemption, but Aya and Ahmed were still banned. When they were 9 months old, starting to maybe master staircases and things like that, it was unfortunately too late for them. And they both died in the town of Khan Sheikhoun in Syria in the sarin attack. And so this is their father, cradling the two of them. And so I just want to say that 59 Tomahawk missiles do not change the fact that for 9 months of their lives, Aya and Ahmed not only were banned from the United States, from the love of our churches who are ready to receive them, from communities that are willing to help them, but they were told a story that they were dangerous. Not terrorists were dangerous, not specific people, not members of groups, not even people older than, let's say, 10.
Yep.
For the duration of their lives, they were shamed, as millions of people have been shamed. And I just think it's very, very important to not, so many people who are opponents of the president are now calling him heroic and presidential because he unleashed some missiles.
Yeah.
He told those 9-month-old kids their whole lives, you can't come in.
Yeah, and Eamon, it told them, going all the way back to the campaign, there are so many stories like this. There's a 5-year-old, a little bit older, obviously, than these twins, Omran Dakhnish, who, there was another very famous photo that everyone saw. He's in the back of an ambulance in Aleppo. The images of him, and you can see him there, everyone saw this photo. This came out on August 17, 2016. And this is Donald Trump's first general election ad, the first general election ad he ran 3 days later on August 19th. Take a look.
In Hillary Clinton's America, the system stays rigged against Americans. Syrian refugees flood in. Illegal immigrants convicted of committing crimes get to stay, collecting Social Security benefits, skipping the line. Our border open, it's more of the same, but worse.
So this idea that he had this sudden realization that there was atrocities going on in Syria is just demonstrably not true based on his own advertising.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the, I guess, conundrums of politics. Why an individual who has lived through, and in this case President Trump, has seen and witnessed chemical gas attacks in Syria. This was not the first, this was not the worst chemical gas attack to happen in Syria. And it wasn't even the first in the Trump presidency, believe it or not. We're talking about it, and I understand that because the images are horrific.
Sure.
But there were at least 3 different other reports of alleged chemical attacks in the week prior to this attack.
Yep.
And none of those drew the kind of response or condemnation from President Trump, not even a mention, let alone say, you know what, these lines have now been crossed.
Yeah.
So you do have to start to ask yourself, okay, well, what was the triggering mechanism for President Trump to suddenly reverse course in 180 degrees and go in a completely opposite direction? But you also have to ask yourself, did these 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles save lives? Did they end the war? Did they bring us any closer to the end of the Assad regime inside Syria? And I'm not sure that anybody could make the argument that these 59 Tomahawk missiles are bringing us any closer to a resolution of that conflict, even to saving lives, because as Reuters was reporting, literally less than 24 hours after the U.S. carried out those airstrikes, Syrian fighter jets were once again taking off from that airfield, probably going back and bombing other targets in the north of Syria.
Yeah.
So I think it's much more nuanced than simply saying, and as Anand was saying, people are saying the president was heroic, these measures were heroic. It's much more complex than that. It's disturbing to see that people are saying that an act of war is somehow presidential, when in reality it doesn't bring us any closer to the end of the conflict, which is what everybody wants.
Yeah, and David, from the other question that was raised in the minds of a lot of people is whether or not this, pinprick operation, which I think that pretty much everyone agrees now did not stop Bashar al-Assad's capability of launching chemical weapons attacks on his own people, but whether it could presage a bigger commitment from the United States to regime change. We've heard a lot of praise for Donald Trump, including from some folks who are pro-Iraq war, from your ideological camp, thinking that this might be the beginning of a regime change operation. Is that something that you foresee actually happening?
Well, we don't have an alternative. If we did, that's the gravamen, the core of the case against intervention in the Syrian civil war, is that there's nobody in that war we're in favor of. And that was different from Iraq. There were people in Iraq we wanted to see in power. There's no one in Syria that we want to see in power. Kind of hard to fight when you don't have something to fight in favor of. I want to say something with this refugee matter, because just as we criticized President Trump for striking Syria based on an emotional response, we shouldn't make our refugee policy based on an emotional response. There are pictures for everything. There are pictures from Stockholm where 4 people were killed and dozens hurt by an act of terror committed by an Uzbek refugee. There was a terrible incident in London. A lot of shocking pictures from that. Everyone has
Not by a
pictures.
refugee.
No, in that case, not not by refugee.
Yeah, so I don't think I mean, we should be careful not to evoke. I think when we're talking about refugees and you're evoking a London attacker, that is.
May I just have a second sentence, if you don't mind?
Yeah, go ahead, have it.
Okay. Yours are very fascinating, but I'd like to have at least 2 or 3.
Go ahead.
Look, Europe faces this gigantic internal security problem from its second-generation Muslim diaspora that is not assimilated well, which creates tremendous problems of economic integration and tremendous problems of national security. And those are true in every European country. There are pictures everywhere. So if you're going to think rationally about things, that's why God gave us words. You read the text, you study the figures, and you make intelligent decisions, whether that is about war, whether that is about immigration.
And I'm going to give Eamon a chance to respond.
The point is that, and I think David's point is valid, is not to make things based on emotion. The policy is driven by emotion when people evoke things that are not factually correct. A London attacker born in London, I forgot his name, I think it's Adrian Elms, who then is portrayed as a refugee because people evoke it as an act of a refugee committing a crime, then forces a policy based on emotion. So I agree with David that a policy shouldn't be about emotion, but it also should be based on fact. And when you're evoking attackers that are not refugees, and that Uzbekistan is not even on the list of countries that President Trump is banning, and none of the attackers who have carried out attacks in the United States are on the list of countries that are being banned by President Trump, then that's not a fact-based discussion. That's an emotional discussion, and that's why Anand's picture is powerful.
Yeah, and you know, Nair, I want to bring you into this as well, because if you want to talk about the emotional responses that could be triggered, Donald Trump started off in his very first raid with an action, a military action that wound up killing an 8-year-old girl who was an American citizen. And so it all gets blended in. I mean, that image of that young girl is also added to the emotional sort of toll that's taken, and yet most Americans don't even know where Yemen is and don't even know why we're attacking it.
I'm glad that we have a president who has some emotional depth, and frankly, not exactly what he was portraying throughout most of the campaign. So I do appreciate he's recognizing that children are dying around the world. But the contradiction there is that doesn't necessarily line up then with any policy deliverables or even any indication that the same president understands the value of what the U.S. military can do for humanitarian intervention, or what even the government can do for its own people. I mean, this is a president who, while evoking babies dying, is threatening to cut Meal on Wheels, is produced a budget that removes almost entirely the funding for any type of diplomacy or any type of humanitarian aid, any of the work that really would be the follow-up to such an air attack and a concerted military campaign. So what we're seeing is that, yes, there is some depth of emotion here, but it is hopping from emotion to emotion, and there's not a consistent thread of any underlying strategy that will really solve the challenges that we face in the world and that we face as a country.
Anand, I question whether or not we are qualified to even claim that Donald Trump has any depth of emotion. We saw a policy change that was quite quick in 24 hours, but between the story that you told, between the story of the ad that he did right after, where is this evidence that Donald Trump has some depth of emotion about this issue?
In his own words, and maybe it's true and maybe it's false, but I think what's interesting is I want to, actually endorse emotion for a second, because as a writer, I'll tell you, if you write about 50 million people who are displaced right now, no one cares. If you individuate the victim, as social psychologists say, and you put a face on it, you arouse emotions, and that's a way into getting people to care. The problem is not that Donald Trump had emotions or acted with some prompting from them. The problem is that that's all he seemed to have in this situation.
Right.
Emotions are the way in. They're not a strategy.
But at the end of the day, go on quickly.
It seems to be that the emotion itself is the goal in expressing that, and that's the evidence of a showman. That is not the evidence of somebody with the substantive skill set or the ability to even delegate that substantive skill set to others to actually do the thing that makes change.
And the thing I think that people are worried about, Eamon, is that also it's an emotional sort of reaction that could also drag us into another Iraq.
I think, first of all, it's a theatrical performance more so than it is an emotional one, because I think when you take a look at, as I was saying, the actual action and what does it do in terms of marrying policy with the reality of the stated objective, which is bringing the conflict to the end, trying to topple the regime, if that is the official position of this current administration, which they're still ambiguous about. All of those things are not marrying with the action. There's no way you can say that the action taken on Friday morning somehow marries with the stated objective. But the worst thing that the United States can do, and this is something that sometimes is lost on a lot of people in policy, the decision makers, is there is no space for the Middle East to once again trust the United States for another military intervention in Syria. And this is what makes it so hard. When you ask people, like, hey, do you want this conflict to end? You say, yeah, we would love the international community to intervene. But there is a crisis of moral authority in the United States carrying out actions in the Middle East. People are simply not buying it or convinced by it. And that makes the job of the United States, when they want to do good, that much harder and much harder of a sell.
And this is what we face overseas. What we face overseas is that we We are the United States government, and we have a long history. So blaming President Obama for problems, President Trump is now not just a partisan speaking to a domestic audience.
Yep.
He is part of a continuum of American history, and that's how people will be judging us.
Yep, absolutely. I wish we had more time. Thank you, Ayman Mohyeldin and Anand Girdardas, and Nayyirah Haq and David Frum are sticking around. And
hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.